The stench hits you first. A physical assault that makes your eyes water and your stomach heave. This isn't just a bad smell. This is chemical warfare from the bowels of hell itself. London, 1858. You're standing on the banks of the Thames during the hottest summer in living memory. What you're breathing isn't air. It's a poisonous cocktail of human waste, industrial runoff, and the bloated corpses of whatever couldn't survive it. They call it the Great Stink, but that's like calling the Black Death a bit of a cough. You've been in Victorian London for exactly 6 hours. The wealthy are fleeing to country estates. Parliament has drenched curtains in lime chloride just to continue functioning. But you have nowhere to go. You're poor, which means you'll stay here breathing in death with every inhalation. Before we condemn you to this reeking purgatory, take a moment to consider that for millions, this wasn't a historical curiosity. It was Tuesday and Wednesday, and every damned day of their shortened lives. The miracle isn't that so many died in Victorian London. The miracle is that anyone survived at all. Welcome to the world's most prosperous city, where prosperity is measured by how far you can get from the smell. You won't make it a month. The Victorians who did weren't lucky. They were forged in filth and refused to drown in it. Let's see how they managed what you most certainly cannot. 1. Avoid the water if you want to live. You're thirsty, desperately thirsty. There's water everywhere. The Thames sloshing merrily along, water vendors on every corner, a pump in your lodging house courtyard. Plenty of options for your drinking pleasure, and they'll all probably kill you. In Victorian London, water isn't life, it's liquid death with excellent distribution. That cool, clear pump water. It's been on quite the journey, filtering through graveyards, dancing past broken sewer pipes, and collecting whatever 8 million Londoners have thoughtfully deposited upstream. Delightful. The year is 1854, and you're living in Soho. Your neighbors have been dropping like flies. 700 people dead in 10 days. They call it cholera, this disease that empties you from both ends until you're a human hourglass, except with bodily fluids instead of sand. How festive. Dr. John Snow, not yet famous enough for his own pub sign, has just removed the handle from the Broad Street pump after tracing the outbreak to its source. Brilliant timing. That, too late for your neighbor's 5 children, all dead within 48 hours. But at least science is progressing. Small comfort to the freshly bereaved. The wealthy have options. Naturally, they buy spring water delivered in sealed containers from the countryside. Costs about what you earn in a week. But who's counting? Some have private wells, dug deep enough to bypass the soil where your ancestors and their waste have been marinating. But you improvise or die, usually both. Look at that rain barrel outside your window, your personal survival flask when Mother Nature decides to weep over London, which seems appropriate. The water collects on rooftops covered in soot, bird excrement, and industrial fallout. Still safer than what comes from the ground. During dry spells, you guard it like the crown jewels. You've seen men stab each other over the last inch of rainwater. Very civilized Britain. When it doesn't rain, you drink beer. Not because you're a hopeless drunk, though that's a separate Victorian pastime, but because the brewing process kills bacteria. Even children drink small beer, a weaker version that keeps them hydrated without rendering them completely useless. Easy explain of why majority British are alcoholic. Some neighbors drink milk instead. A daring choice, really. The milk comes from cows kept in urban dairy yards so cramped the animals can't lie down. They're fed on distillery waste and look about as healthy as you'd expect. The milk often arrives pre-soured and generously enhanced with chalk, water, or plaster of Paris to stretch profits. But it's not water, so your odds improve from definitely dying to probably dying. Progress is progress. The truly desperate drink from the Thames, usually with a splash of gin, not enough to disinfect, just enough to mask the flavor of floating corpses and industrial runoff. You've seen the results, entire families transforming into bloated corpses faster than you can say inadequate sanitation infrastructure. The public pumps draw mourning crowds, women and children queuing for hours for water that might sustain or destroy them. A bit like Russian roulette, but with cups. You watch carefully, noting which pumps have shorter queues. Fewer people might mean cleaner water, or it might mean that pump has already murdered too many customers to remain fashionable. The veterans of urban survival have systems. They let water sit overnight, allowing sediment to settle. Look, the chunky bits have sunk to the bottom. It's practically avian. They boil it when they can afford fuel, which is rarely. Many add tea. Not for the sophisticated flavor profile, but because tannic acid kills some bacteria. Very practical. These Victorians, dying of thirst while surrounded by poison, requires innovation. A wealthy philanthropist visited your neighborhood last month, absolutely horrified. He returns with pamphlets explaining germ theory and water purification. Most of your neighbors can't read. Those who can laugh bitterly. Knowledge without means is like a chamber pot without a bottom, technically present, but practically useless. In the room next door, a mother bribes the night watchman at a nearby estate for sixpence, a significant portion of her earnings. He'll let her fill her bucket from their private well after dark. If caught, she'll be arrested for theft. Because water, like everything else in Victorian London, belongs to someone, and it's never you. Funny how that works. You develop a sixth sense about water. The slight discoloration, the almost imperceptible odor, the way it feels against your skin when you wash. These become life or death observations. You're essentially a water sommelier, except your reviews are probably won't kill you or certain death with floral notes. After 3 weeks of drought, rain finally arrives. You join neighbors on the rooftop, faces upturned, mouths open to catch heaven's bounty. It tastes of coal smoke and industrial progress, but it won't kill you today. Tomorrow is another delightful gamble in this game of hydrological roulette. Down the street, a physician attends a wealthy family suffering from lead poisoning. Their expensive private plumbing is slowly pickling their organs from inside. Even money can't fully protect against water's treachery. The great equalizer in a society that otherwise specializes in inequality. A new public works project has begun. They're building sewers to channel waste away from drinking water. In your lifetime, perhaps, clean water might flow from public taps, but that's for the future. Today, you stare at your cup, weighing thirst against survival. Decisions. This is life in Victorian London. Each sip is a dice roll with death himself, who frankly doesn't seem very sporting about the odds. The water that sustains all life has become your most reliable predator, and yet you must drink. So you calculate, compensate, and hope your intestines remain inside your body where they belong. The survivors aren't the strongest. They're the most paranoid, the most knowledgeable, or simply the luckiest bastards in this cesspool of a metropolis. As typhoid claims another family down the hall, you raise your cup in a silent toast to making it through another day in a city where even the most basic necessity has become your enemy. Now, take a deep breath. Oh wait, don't. The air around you is no friend either. If the water doesn't get you, the atmosphere surely will. 2. Live above the smell, if you can. You've made it through your first week in Victorian London without drinking yourself to death. Congratulations. Now comes your next challenge, finding somewhere to sleep that won't kill you before morning. In the vertical hierarchy of Victorian London, elevation isn't just about status, it's about survival. The higher up you live, the further you are from the miasma that creeps along the ground like a predator. Science hasn't yet confirmed germ theory, but every poor Londoner knows instinctively that the stench rises from the ground and settles in low places. They can't name hydrogen sulfide or methane, but they can smell when it's thick enough to kill. Your options are stark, basement, or attic. This choice determines whether you'll wake tomorrow. The basement room is cheaper, significantly so. It's also a death sentence during heavy rains, when sewage backs up through the floors. Even on dry days, the air sits heavy and thick, clinging to your lungs with each breath. The walls weep with moisture that breeds black mold and breeds consumption. Children born in basement rooms rarely see their 5th birthday. Their lungs never stand a chance. But the competition for attic rooms is fierce. Though stifling in summer and freezing in winter, they sit above the worst of the stench. The roof might leak, but at least what drips through is rainwater rather than effluent from the family above. You'll pay nearly double for the privilege of height, but you'll likely live twice as long. The buildings themselves are architectural marvels of subdivision. What was once a single-family home has been partitioned into 20 separate lodgings, a warren of humanity stacked floor upon floor. A single room might house a family of 8, or be further divided by hanging sheets to accommodate multiple families or lodgers. Privacy is a luxury that died somewhere around the 3rd wave of rural migration to the city. The building you enter has a clear social stratification. The ground floor, while still poor, houses those with steady employment: factory workers, seamstresses, clerks. The 2nd floor is crowded with day laborers who find work most days but not all. As you climb higher, you find the truly desperate seasonal workers, the elderly, women supporting children alone. Then, just below the attic, there's a curious inversion: artists, writers, and students willing to trade comfort for light. Finally, the attic itself houses those who've chosen elevation over space, families crammed under sloped ceilings where adults can't stand upright, except in the very center of the room. The basement, though, the basement is where you end up when all other options fail. It's where newly arrived immigrants start, where alcoholics finish, where the sick go when they can no longer climb stairs. It's the last stop before the workhouse or the street. You find a room on the 3rd floor, not ideal, but above the worst of it. 8 feet by 10 feet, it will cost you 2 shillings weekly, nearly a third of what you might earn as a laborer. The previous tenant isn't fully moved out. He's being carried out, yellow with jaundice, headed for the hospital where he'll almost certainly die. The landlady doesn't bother changing the straw in the mattress before showing you in. That's your responsibility, if you care about such niceties. Your neighbors are already adapting to the stench that seems to intensify with the summer heat. Across the narrow hallway, a consumptive tailor has stuffed rags under his door. Next door, a widow with 4 children has spread vinegar-soaked cloths across her windowsill, a folk remedy against miasma that's older than the city itself. The vinegar costs money she should spend on food, but she's buried 2 children already. She'll starve the living to protect them from the air that stole the dead. The shared privy in the back courtyard serves all 57 residents of your building. It's emptied weekly in theory. In practice, it overflows by Thursday, earlier during hot spells. The night soil men who should empty it have their own system of priorities, and buildings that can't afford proper bribes end up last on their rounds. The smell from the courtyard rises up the central stairwell, invading every room, stronger on each hot day. Wealthier buildings have indoor water closets now, a marvel of modern plumbing. But without proper ventilation or consistent water flow, they often make the problem worse, concentrating the odor inside rather than in the yard. Besides, the sewer system can't keep up with these innovations. What flushes away simply backs up elsewhere, or flows directly into the Thames, completing the cycle of contamination. The real innovation of the poor isn't in plumbing, it's in defensive architecture within their own rooms. You watch and learn. Windows are strategic assets, opened or sealed based on prevailing winds and neighboring odors. Sheets, soaked in lye water, hang across doorways. Herbal bundles, whatever can be gathered or stolen from parks, dangle from rafters. Lavender for those who can afford it, pennyroyal or rosemary for those who can't. The smells combat each other in an olfactory war where humans are collateral damage. Some families construct makeshift ventilation systems, boards angled to direct airflow, paper tubes running from window to create cross breezes. In winter, these same innovations become liabilities, letting in cold that kills as surely as disease. But summer in Victorian London is survival's proving ground. If you make it through August, you might survive the year. Your own room has a single window. Through it, you can see directly into the room across the narrow alley, so close you could touch hands with your neighbor if both of you leaned out. This proximity means you share air, for better or worse. If consumption takes hold there, it will visit you next. You make note to observe them daily for symptoms. Night brings a temporary reprieve as the air cools, only to trap fresh horrors with the morning sun. Heat bakes the waste in streets and yards, intensifying the chemical reactions that produce the most noxious gases. By midday, the air itself seems to have weight and texture. The building's attic dwellers develop a curious habit. At the day's hottest point, they emerge onto the rooftop, a dangerous practice given the uneven surfaces and absence of rails. They bring their sewing, their food preparation, even their children's lessons into the marginally fresher air above the roofline. One family has cultivated herbs in broken crockery along the roof edge, not just for food, but for burning as a fumigant against the worst of the stench. Meanwhile, the basement dwellers rarely emerge at all during daylight. Like nocturnal creatures, they surface after dark when the air grows momentarily cleaner. Children born in these lower depths develop a pallor no sunlight ever touches, ghostly white with blue undertones that caricaturists capture in popular illustrations of urban poverty. After a month, your senses begin to adapt. This is perhaps the cruelest trick of all. You stop noticing the omnipresent stench until a new variation catches your attention. Your clothes, your skin, your hair all carry the smell so completely that it becomes part of you. Only visitors react now, their expressions of disgust a mirror to what yours once was. Your lungs, however, don't adapt. The constant irritation from sulfurous gases creates a hacking cough that joins the symphony of respiratory distress, echoing through the building at night. The youngest and oldest suffer most visibly, but everyone pays the tax of breathable air with fragments of their health. By now you've learned to read the invisible topography of smell. You know which streets to avoid after rainfall, which manufacturing districts produce the most caustic air, which markets mask rotting food with the smoke of scented woods. You navigate by nose as much as by sight. As autumn approaches, a new calculus begins. Windows that provided vital ventilation now let in deadly cold. The same walls that trapped heat and intensified summer stenches become shields against winter's equally lethal embrace. The battle for survival shifts, but never ends. This is the vertical gamble of Victorian London. How high can you afford to live? How much can your lungs endure? The wealthy escape to upper floors of spacious homes with windows on all sides. The poor make microscopic adjustments. A shifted bed, a strategically placed candle to create convection, a potion of herbs to mask what cannot be avoided. For now, you've secured your place above the worst of it, but the stink is rising, always rising, and winter brings its own airborne terrors. Smoke from 10,000 coal fires will soon replace the stench of rot with the choking embrace of soot and sulfur. The air you breathe is trying to kill you, and if that doesn't succeed, just wait until you fall ill. 3. Don't get sick or don't get caught. That persistent cough, just a tickle. The blood-flecked handkerchief, a fashion statement in red. The fever making you sweat through your mattress. London's famous microclimate, obviously. In Victorian London, acknowledging illness is like volunteering for an execution with extra paperwork. It starts with a scratchy throat, unremarkable in a city where breathing is essentially smoking without the pleasure of tobacco. But 3 days later, you're struggling to hide the death rattle in your chest as you report to your textile mill shift. 14 hours feels like an eternity when your lungs are staging a rebellion. The foreman's giving you that look, the one that says, "I'm calculating how quickly I can replace you with someone slightly less tubercular." Last month, Sarah from spinning missed 2 days with a fever. When she returned, her position had been filled. No warning, no compensation, just another disposable body cast into London's overflowing human rubbish bin. With no references, she couldn't find new work. Within weeks, she and her 3 charming children were enjoying scenic views of the gutter. No one knows where they went. No one asks, what a wonderfully efficient system. This is the first rule of Victorian survival. Illness is a luxury reserved for people whose portraits hang in galleries. The second rule, if you do fall ill, lie like your life depends on it, because it absolutely does. You've developed deceptions that would make Parliament envious. You chew willow bark to reduce fever before work, swallow gin to suppress coughs, and time your most dramatic hacking to coincide with the loudest machinery. That sound, just the loom acting up again. My lungs? Never better, sir. This blood? New fashion internal bleeding is all the rage this season. The wealthy fall ill in Egyptian cotton sheets, attended by physicians who make house calls and speak Latin to sound important. The poor get caught in a machinery of public health that's about as compassionate as the meat grinder at the sausage factory. If you're identified as ill, particularly with anything fashionably contagious, the dominoes begin to fall. First comes unemployment, then eviction. If you're truly blessed by fate, you'll attract attention from public health officials empowered to drag you kicking and screaming to a fever hospital. How thoughtful of them to provide free transportation. The destination might kill you, but the ride is complimentary. Hospitals in Victorian London aren't places of healing. They're convenient, centralized locations for dying with professional supervision. The mortality rates would make a battlefield surgeon wince. Entering with a minor ailment gives you excellent odds of leaving in a pine box, thanks to the hospital's generous policy of exposing you to every other disease in the building. It's like a collector's set. Gotta catch 'em all. This explains the thriving industry of hidden healthcare. In your tenement, Mrs. O'Malley on the second floor treats consumption with herbal concoctions and whispered prayers. She's never studied medicine, but her patients die at roughly the same rate as those under professional care, which makes her a leading healthcare provider by Victorian standards. The widow Jenkins sells miracle tonics from her kitchen. They're mostly gin with willow bark and whatever spices she can pilfer from the market, completely unregulated, potentially toxic, and still safer than most hospital treatments. Her most popular remedy contains enough alcohol to make you forget you're ill, which is arguably effective medicine. Everyone in your building can diagnose basic ailments. They have to. Rashes are differentiated by pattern and spread. Fevers are categorized by how many layers of clothing cause sweating. Cause are classified by sound, duration, and what comes up when you hack into a rag. It's a diagnostic system born of necessity and refined through generations of watching neighbors die from identifiable causes. You've learned the art of strategic illness timing. If you must succumb, do it between jobs, never during employment. Calculate recovery against savings with mathematical precision. 4 days is the maximum you can afford to be bedridden before economic collapse. Time it poorly, and you'll trade a sick bed for a coffin with a brief transitional period on the street. The true masters of Victorian survival maintain medical disguises with theatrical precision. Women bind their chests to suppress consumption, coughs. Men stuff rags in their cheeks to hide the sunken look of fever. Children are coached to suppress symptoms in front of authorities. Cough in your elbow, never where the rent collector can hear. Self-treatment becomes high art. You lance your own boils with needles held in candle flames. You set minor fractures with splints made from furniture scraps. You dose yourself with potentially lethal combinations of folk remedies and industrial chemicals. Death by disease or death by cure, a charming dilemma that faces you with each symptom. Public health officials are feared more than the diseases they supposedly combat. When cholera sweeps through, entire buildings empty overnight, not from death, but from families fleeing forced hospitalization. They'll risk almost certain infection rather than face the treatment. Smart money, that. The quarantine flag on a building is a death sentence, not just for the infected, but economically for everyone residing there. No one will hire you if you come from a disease house. So neighbors collaborate in concealment, creating elaborate systems to hide outbreaks from authorities. They smuggle out bodies at night, falsify causes of death, bribe officials to look away. It's community spirit at its most desperately pragmatic. For children, illness carries special terror. The sickly child might be removed for their own good to an institution from which remarkably few return. Parents teach offspring from toddlerhood how to disguise symptoms. 5-year-olds become accomplished performers, suppressing coughs and hiding rashes with the skill of seasoned actors. No, sir, I always breathe this way. It's my natural constitution. You develop a network of lookouts and warnings. The cry of inspector sends the ill scrambling into hiding places or out rear exits. The sudden appearance of patients on the street, sitting upright, attempting to look robustly healthy despite their grey complexions, signals an official visit to your building. The cruel irony, those most in need of rest push themselves hardest. The consumptive works longer hours to save against inevitable unemployment. The fever patient takes on extra tasks to prove their indispensability. The injured perform feats that worsen their conditions because stillness equals starvation. Recovery becomes secondary to appearing recovered. It's not about getting well, it's about looking well enough to keep your job, your room, your place in society's lowest tier. Actual healing is a distant luxury compared to the immediate necessity of seeming healthy enough to function. You know the true statistics, not the ones in official reports. In your building alone, 3 died of exhaustion last winter, a convenient diagnosis that requires no investigation. 4 returned to family in the country, a euphemism for being carried to unmarked graves when their diseases became impossible to hide. And at least 6 children vanished into institutions after exhibiting symptoms their parents couldn't conceal. This is the calculus of Victorian illness. Not whether you'll recover, but whether you can maintain the appearance of health long enough to survive the social consequences of disease. It's not the bacteria or viruses most likely to kill you, it's the system's response to them. So you swallow the blood rather than spit it out. You bind the wound tighter rather than seek proper treatment. You work through fevers that would fell a horse, and you teach your children to do the same, because in Victorian London, the diagnosis feared above all others is unable to work. Speaking of work, it's time to consider your employment options. They're all terrible, but some might kill you slightly less quickly than others. If you can't eat fresh, eat smart. You've survived the water and managed not to get caught being ill. Congratulations! Now comes your next challenge, putting something in your stomach that won't finish what the Thames started. Welcome to Victorian London's culinary scene, where edible is a flexible concept and fresh is something you've heard mentioned in fairy tales. The smell hits you first as you approach the market, not the appetizing aroma of cooking food, but the distinct punch of meat transitioning from one state of existence to another. This isn't the pristine spectacle of covered markets where the wealthy shop. This is the last stop before the rubbish heap, the final opportunity for vendors to extract profit from food that's frankly given up the will to live. Lovely bit of beef, hardly turned at all, shouts a butcher, waving a cut that's suspiciously grey around the edges. He's not technically lying. Parts of it are indeed still recognizable as beef. The green tinge, that's just a special feature, free of charge. The wealthy are enjoying their prime cuts across town while you're playing Russian roulette with your digestive system. You've developed an expert nose out of sheer necessity. The sniff test is your first line of defense. A slight sourness in milk might be manageable. That particular tang in meat means certain regret. The faint whiff of ammonia in fish suggests it's seen far too many sunrises since leaving the water. Your nostrils have become more reliable than any government inspector, not that those exist in any meaningful way. The market bottom economy operates on precise timing. You learn the exact hour when unsold goods get discounted to pennies, 4:30 p.m. at the fishmonger's, when he can no longer pretend his stock will survive another day, 5:15 p.m. at the baker's, when yesterday's bread must make way for tomorrow's, 6 p.m. at the butcher's, when he finally admits defeat in the battle against nature's decomposition timeline. Your grandmother taught you the art of food resurrection, techniques passed down through generations of the poor. Meat gone slightly off, boil it twice, changing the water between boilings. The wealthy call this flavor loss. You call it not dying of putrefaction. Add enough vinegar and almost anything becomes temporarily safe. Spices aren't just for flavor, they're chemical warfare against bacteria. Heavily peppered stews, curries with enough turmeric to stain your insides yellow, anything to mask both taste and bacterial multiplication. The poorest families pool resources to afford these precious antibacterial powders, understanding instinctively what science will later confirm. Certain spices have preservative properties worth more than their weight in gold when you're eating yesterday's discards. Too good for the pig bin, not good enough for the master's table, mutters the cook at the grand house where your cousin works as a scullery maid. This is the unofficial motto of the poor food economy. The wealthy's indible waste becomes your family's dinner. Your cousin smuggles out scraps tied in her apron, meat trimmed from the edges of perfect cuts, vegetables deemed too wilted for genteel tables, broken biscuits, and collapsed soufflés. In better homes, this would be criminal theft. In London's practical underground economy, it's recognized nutrition redistribution. The black market butchers operate after dusk, selling meat of questionable origin for prices the poor can afford. No one asks if that beef started life as horse, dog, or worse. The prevailing wisdom: proper cooking kills anything dangerous, and hunger kills more reliably than questionable meat. Besides, after sufficient time in a stew with pilfered vegetables and salt, salvaged from fish-packing warehouses, most proteins reach a state of anonymous edibility. Urban foraging becomes second nature. Mushrooms growing in damp corners of parks, dandelion greens from any patch of untrampled earth, sorrel from between cobblestones. Children become expert gatherers, knowing which berries won't poison them and which weeds add substance to watery soups. The city's neglected spaces become survival gardens for those who know where to look. Food preservation without modern technology is elevated to religious ritual. Salting, smoking, pickling, turning today's barely edible into tomorrow's still possible to consume. Cabbage fermented to sauerkraut in crocks under beds. Fruits preserved in sugar when it can be stolen or scrounged. Fish dried on strings near chimneys until it reaches a state of leathery immortality. You learn that hunger itself can be managed, stretched, negotiated with. 2 smaller meals provide more sustained energy than one larger one. Drinking hot water with a pinch of salt creates the temporary sensation of fullness. Chewing longer makes less food more satisfying. These aren't mere tips, they're survival strategies passed from grandmother to mother to child in an unbroken chain of hardscrabble wisdom. The communal pot is both practical and symbolic. Families in your tenement taking turns, adding whatever they've scrounged to a perpetual stew that simmers on the landing's shared stove. Monday's bones become Tuesday's broth, enriched by Wednesday's wilted vegetables and Thursday's questionable offal. By Friday, it's a mysterious concoction that tastes primarily of survival, but it's hot and it's food, and no one asks questions about providence or freshness. Trust becomes a scarce commodity, more valuable than the food itself. The grocer who doesn't water down milk quite as much as his competitors. The street vendor whose meat pies contain actual meat, mostly. The market woman who might slip an extra potato into your purchase if your children look particularly hollow-cheeked. These relationships are cultivated with the care of precious garden plants, nurtured through small kindness, repeated patronage, and the occasional exchange of useful information. The ultimate food currency isn't money, it's knowledge, knowing which inspector can be bribed to look away from a shipment of condemned meat being redirected to poor markets, knowing which warehouse dumped damaged goods behind which alley at what time, knowing which wild plants are edible and which will have you praying for death within hours. You've mastered the art of visually assessing food in seconds. The slight iridescent sheen on meat that signals it's moved beyond questionable to dangerous. The barely perceptible dark spots on bread that indicate mold has taken hold beneath the surface. The specific cloudiness in milk that suggests it's been watered down with liquid from sources best not contemplated. Children run complicated food intelligence networks, trading information about where damaged fruit is being sold cheap, which bakery is disposing of yesterday's goods, which street vendor is desperately selling off stock before it spoils completely. This information travels faster than any telegraph, creates a continuously updated map of survival possibilities. The wealthy worry about which fork to use for fish. You worry about whether that fish died of natural causes or was found floating belly up. They fret over wine pairings. You calculate whether the extra half-penny for bread is worth going without candles for the night. They plan menus weekly. You plan how to stretch a potato to feed 4. Yet in this desperate economy of food scarcity, surprising innovations emerge. Recipes designed to mask spoilage become culinary traditions. Preservation techniques born of necessity become signature preparations. The poor create dishes of remarkable ingenuity from ingredients the wealthy would disdain. Organ meats transformed into savory puddings, vegetable ends and peels incorporated into hearty soups, stale bread revived through countless creative preparations. This is Victorian London's hidden food system, an alternate economy of the marginally edible, the creatively repurposed, the masterfully disguised, where survival rides on your ability to distinguish between food that will merely make you uncomfortable and food that will kill you outright. As evening falls, you return to your lodging with the day's finds, half a loaf of bread only partially molded, some questionable sausage obtained at steep discount, and an onion with just 2 rotten layers. It's a feast by the standards of your building. You'll eat tonight. Tomorrow brings its own challenges. But first, you need to earn enough to afford even these dubious provisions. And in Victorian London, that means keeping yourself employed through a workday designed to test the limits of human endurance. You splash water on your face from a cracked basin, cold, obviously, because hot water is for people who matter in the social hierarchy. Your breakfast is a crust of bread saved from yesterday and a swig of tea so weak it's essentially brown-tinted memory of leaves. Nutritional science won't be invented for decades, but your body knows you're slowly starving. No matter, the gnawing in your stomach is just background music to the symphony of survival. 5. Keep working no matter what. The factory whistle pierces your dreams at 4:30 a.m. It's still pitch dark outside, not that you'd know. Your windowless room hasn't seen daylight since it was constructed. You have exactly 17 minutes to become a functioning human being before the second whistle blows. Miss that, and the factory gates close, leaving you without a day's wages. 3 such occurrences, and you're unemployed. In Victorian London, unemployment isn't just inconvenient, it's a death sentence with extra steps. The streets at this hour are a procession of shuffling shadows, thousands of workers moving toward their respective hells, distinguished only by which particular way they'll be physically destroyed today. The match girl with fingers yellowed from phosphorus poisoning, the chimney sweep's boy, stunted and coughing up black phlegm, the seamstress already squinting from eye strain before her 16-hour day begins. You're one of the lucky ones, The textile mill only threatens you with deafening noise, lung-scarring cotton dust, and the occasional limb-removing machinery accident. Luxury. Child labor isn't just common, it's economically essential. That 10-year-old scurrying alongside you isn't going to school. What an adorable concept. He's heading to the coal sorting shed, where he'll spend 12 hours in the dark, hunched over moving belts, picking out rocks from coal pieces. His smaller fingers are more efficient tools than any machine. When they're crushed or worn bloody, there's always another child waiting for the position. The Industrial Revolution runs on tiny broken bodies, the original renewable resource. The widow 3 doors down from you has transformed grief into industry. Her husband died in a construction accident last year, fell 5 stories, landed on a spike. Very neat, no prolonged medical expenses. Now she takes in laundry, boiling massive copper tubs from dawn until dusk. Her hands are raw, cracked manuscripts of suffering, permanently prune-wrinkled and bleached white from lye. She charges 3 pence per bundle and completes 20 bundles on a good day. After costs, she clears perhaps a shilling. Her 3 children work as well. The oldest, 12, delivers the laundry. The middle 9 stokes the fires. The youngest 6 hangs and folds. Together, they almost earn enough to starve slightly more slowly than their neighbors. Specialized scavenger classes have evolved in this environment, each with their own economic niche. The mudlarks, usually children, wade through the toxic Thames mud at low tide searching for anything remotely valuable: coal bits, metal scraps, lost coins, rope fragments. They sell their finds for pennies, return home covered in industrial waste and raw sewage, sleep for a few hours, then go out with the next low tide, regardless of whether that's 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. Clock time is for people with proper jobs. Tidal time is for those who scavenge the margins. The pure finders, generally women, collect dog excrement to sell to tanneries for leather processing. They carry scraping tools and buckets, working the same streets each day, fighting other pure finders for territory. The smell becomes so embedded in their skin that they form their own social class. Even other poor people won't sit near them on the rare occasions they attend church. A good day yields a few pence. A bad day means watching your children go hungry. Rag pickers specialize in textile refuse, sorting through mountains of discarded cloth for fibers that can be recycled into paper. They develop sores from handling rotting fabric, suffer respiratory infections from the dust, occasionally contract smallpox or scarlet fever from the clothes of the dead. But they're entrepreneurs, owners of their destiny, free to work 18 hours daily for less than a factory slave would earn. The street sellers form a complex ecosystem of desperate commerce. The woman selling matches has invested her last coins in her tiny stock. If she doesn't sell enough today, her landlord will evict her tomorrow. The old man with watercress has walked 10 miles to purchase it wholesale. His profit margin is measured in fractions of pennies per bunch. The child selling cherries in paper cones is supporting a mother confined to bed with consumption. If she doesn't bring home at least 4pence, they lose their room. You punch your time card at the factory precisely at 5 a.m. The overseer marks late arrivals with religious zeal. Time theft, after all, is still theft, and 6 minutes of lateness is worth a half-day's wages in the divine accounting of industrial capitalism. Your station at the power loom is already running. The previous shift worker couldn't leave until you arrived. She's been here since 5 p.m. yesterday, working a double shift because her relief didn't show. Her eyes are hollow with fatigue as she mumbles instructions about tension problems on loom 7. You mentally calculate she's been awake for at least 22 hours. You'd feel sympathy if you weren't about to follow the same path. The noise hits you like a physical blow. Hundreds of mechanized looms create a cacophony that rearranges your internal organs. Workers communicate through elaborate hand signals and lip reading. Many are already half deaf. You'll join them within a few years. The cotton dust hangs in the air like malevolent snow, settling in your lungs with each breath. Old-timers call the resulting condition cotton pneumonia, but there's no official recognition or compensation. You're a machine part, easily replaced when you wear out. The factory inspector visits twice yearly, always on the same days, always with notice. On these special occasions, children below legal working age are hidden in storage closets or sent on day-long errands. Broken safety equipment is temporarily repaired. The single filthy toilet is scrubbed clean for the first and only time that half year. Workers are coached on appropriate responses. Yes, sir. Very safe, sir. Excellent working conditions, sir. Anyone saying otherwise is gone the next day. Bathroom breaks aren't explicitly prohibited. They're just effectively impossible. Leaving your station means your machine sits idle. Idle machines don't produce. Non-producing machines represent loss. You're allotted 30 minutes for lunch and 2 6-minute breaks per 12-hour shift. Most workers train their bodies to need less. Kidney infections are a small price to pay for continued employment. Wednesday afternoon brings a familiar sound, the scream of metal meeting flesh as a new worker gets caught in unguarded gearing. The machines don't stop. Production continues as he's extracted and carried out, leaving a trail of blood drops that someone haphazardly wipes up during the next scheduled 6-minute break. He won't receive compensation. The accident report will inevitably find he was negligent. His family might get a small collection taken up by fellow workers, most of whom can barely feed themselves. By Thursday, a new body stands at his station. The machine cycle is uninterrupted. For women, employment options range from dreadful to catastrophic. Domestic service offers the relative safety of indoor work, with merely 16-hour days, constant surveillance, and routine sexual predation from male household members. Factory work provides equal pay for equal work, equally terrible pay for equally dangerous work, that is. Laundry work combines scalding water, caustic chemicals, and backbreaking labor into a perfect trinity of physical destruction. Seamstress work guarantees blindness by 40. Each profession offers its own specialized form of ruination. The true horror isn't the dangerous machinery, toxic substances, or physical exhaustion. It's that everyone around you is doing mental calculations about how long they can last. How many years before consumption takes hold? How many decades until accumulating poisons cause organ failure? How many winters until their resistance to disease finally collapses? Working-class Victorians aren't planning careers. They're estimating their remaining functional lifespan. But you keep working, not because you're brave or noble or steadfast, because the alternative is witnessing your children starve while you spiral into destitution, workhouse imprisonment, and anonymous burial in a pauper's pit. The Victorian work ethic isn't about moral virtue. It's naked survival instinct dressed up as social principle. Even the sick or injured maintain the pretense of capability. The man with the crushed foot wraps it tightly and continues his delivery route, sweating with pain but terrified of losing his position. The seamstress whose vision is failing compensates by working longer hours, squinting closer at her stitches, knowing each garment brings her closer to darkness but unable to stop. The consumption-racked clerk swallows their coughs and blood, hiding symptoms until they literally collapse at their desk. The Industrial Revolution demands human sacrifice, and Victorian London provides it by the thousands, bodies broken on the altar of progress, ground down to feed the machines, discarded when used up. The miraculous productivity that enables the empire's splendor is extracted from the marrow of the working poor, an ongoing transaction where they trade years of their lives for daily bread. As darkness falls and your shift finally ends, you stumble home through streets now filled with night workers beginning their shifts. The 24-hour cycle of production never stops. The city digests human effort continuously. Your muscles ache, your lungs burn, your ears ring with mechanized echoes that will soundtrack your dreams. But you survived another day of employment, and in Victorian London that's not just an accomplishment, It's beating the odds in a game explicitly designed against you. Tomorrow, you'll wake to the same whistle and do it all again. But tonight, you need to find someone to share your suffering, because even in this industrial nightmare, humans need connection to endure. 6. Share the little you have. Your 12-hour shift has left you hollow-eyed and empty-stomached, but somehow you've managed to bring home a bruised apple and half a loaf of day-old bread. It's not much, but in the bizarre mathematics of Victorian poverty, this meager haul will soon multiply through the alchemy of communal survival. Welcome to the socialist utopia of absolute necessity. When everyone has nothing, sharing becomes less charity and more strategic alliance against oblivion. Karl Marx is scribbling away in the British Library about class solidarity, but he's late to the party. The poor have been practicing their own version for generations out of pure necessity. Your room, all 8 by 10 magnificent feet of it, is actually home to 7 people. Your sister's family moved in after her husband lost his arm in a machinery accident. Their 3 children sleep in a drawer pulled from a broken dresser. Your elderly father occupies the only chair, his rheumatic legs no longer able to climb stairs more than once daily. Personal space exists only in your dreams, and those are crowded too. The first miracle of sharing occurs moments after you enter. Your sister has somehow obtained potato peelings from the kitchen where she works. Combined with your bread and a suspicious onion your nephew found in the gutter, this becomes soup for 7. The mathematics makes no sense. 7 people sharing what wouldn't adequately feed 2, yet somehow everyone gets something in their bowl. It's not nutrition by any scientific standard, but it's marginally more sustaining than licking the walls. Across the landing, Mrs. Donovan's cooking pot is communal property for the entire floor. Today, it's making your soup. Tomorrow, it might be boiling someone's laundry. The day after, sterilizing rags for a birth or death, whichever comes first, often simultaneously in these cheerful accommodations. 23 people share this single pot, maintaining it with greater care than any family heirloom. When it needed mending last winter, everyone contributed a halfpenny, a genuine sacrifice for most, because without it, the entire floor's fragile cooking system would collapse. The building operates as an informal insurance network against disaster. When the O'Reillys on the 3rd floor lost their youngest to diphtheria last month, the funeral costs were silently distributed among 40 households. No one could spare the 6pence they contributed, but everyone understood the mathematical certainty that they would someday need the same support. It's not charity when it's really a subscription service to your own future crisis management. Childcare operates on a rotating basis that would impress military logisticians. Mrs. Patterson watches the building's under-5s during morning shifts, while their mothers work as charwomen or street vendors. In the afternoons, Mrs. Carpenter takes over when Mrs. Patterson leaves for her own job sorting rags. Evenings see the older children, none above 12, supervising the younger ones, while adults work night shifts. The children themselves maintain complex hierarchies of protection, the 8-year-olds watching the 5-year-olds, the 5-year-olds minding the toddlers. It's horribly efficient. Information, perhaps the most valuable currency in Victorian London, flows through networks of strategic sharing. Abernathy on the ground floor, who works as a porter at the wholesale market, learns which shops will receive damaged goods to sell at discount. Word spreads through the building with supernatural speed. When Mrs. Wilson, who cleans at the parish office, discovers which day relief applications will be reviewed most favorably, the knowledge cascades through trusted channels. These intelligence networks mean the difference between eating and starving. Skills circulate as freely as goods. The former tailor on the 4th floor mends clothes in exchange for Mrs. McGregor's bread. She, in turn, receives childcare from the widow Sullivan, who benefits from the rat-catching abilities of the tailor boys. No coin changes hands, yet everyone gets something they desperately need. It's an economy based not on capital, but on the sophisticated understanding that lone survivors in Victorian London are dead survivors. The lending economy would shock modern financial sensibilities. A needle with intact eye might be borrowed by 17 different women in a single week. A hammer circulates to every flat in the building on a regular rotation. Every object of utility belongs in some practical sense to the collective, though nominal ownership remains clear for when something breaks and responsibility must be assigned. Even space itself becomes a shared resource. During day shifts, night workers sleep in beds still warm from their night shift counterparts. A single room might see 3 different families using it in carefully orchestrated shifts. The concept of your room is a theoretical framework overlaid on the practical reality of maximum utilization. Heat, precious commodity in London winters, is collectively maintained. Families take turns buying coal for hallway braziers where children from multiple households huddle together. Body heat becomes a shared resource during freezing nights, with unrelated individuals sleeping in tightly packed rows, like particularly miserable sardines. Hypothermia doesn't care about propriety, and neither do the poor when survival is at stake. Special skills become community assets. The woman who can read deciphers official notices, letters, and newspaper headlines for her illiterate neighbors. The man with a steady hand and basic knowledge serves as the building's medical provider, lancing boils and setting minor fractures. The former midwife delivers babies throughout the neighborhood in exchange for whatever sustenance the new parents can provide. No licensing board regulates this expertise, just as no social service provides an alternative. The most remarkable feature of this communal survival system is its invisibility to outsiders. Victorian social reformers enter the same buildings where these complex networks operate and see only chaos and moral failure. They miss entirely the sophisticated interdependence that makes survival possible. Their reports describe improvidence and lack of organization among the same people who have developed resource allocation systems that would impress military quartermasters. When a building catches fire 2 streets over, you join the bucket chain without hesitation, not from altruism, but because next time it might be your building burning. When typhus sweeps through the neighborhood, those who remain healthy take in the children of the ill without discussion. When the winter of '55 brings snow so deep that food deliveries stop for 5 days, the entire street pools its resources into a single community stockpile, distributed according to need rather than contribution. This isn't socialism as political philosophy, it's survival as practical necessity. The poor have no romantic notions about their communal arrangements. They prefer privacy, property, and self-sufficiency. But Victorian economic reality has made those luxuries inaccessible, so they've created the next best thing. A system where no individual needs to have everything because everyone has something that can be contributed. Your sister's husband, one-armed and unemployable in conventional terms, has become the building's water carrier, making 12 trips daily to the nearest public pump in exchange for food contributions from those too elderly or ill to make the journey themselves. His disability, economically devastating in the mainstream economy, has been absorbed and repurposed within the parallel system of mutual aid. The wealthy imagine the poor live in a Hobbesian nightmare of isolated suffering. The reality is both better and worse, a sophisticated cooperative built atop absolute deprivation. No one has enough, but through careful allocation and exchange, most survive another day. As you finish your impossibly stretched soup, your nephew produces 3 chestnuts he found in the park. These are immediately divided into 7 precisely equal portions. The wealthy might discuss art and politics over their meals. You discuss tomorrow's labor schedule and who has first use of the family's single pair of intact boots. It's not uplifting dinner conversation, but it's the collaborative strategy session that keeps all of you alive. The night grows cold, and bodies press closer together on the shared mattress. Personal boundaries. like every other middle-class luxury, have no place in this environment. Your survival depends not just on what you individually have, but on being part of a resilient network that pools resources, information, skills, and support. In Victorian London, no poor person survives alone. They survive through complex interdependence, unwritten social contracts, and systems invisible to those who've never needed them. While the wealthy imagine themselves as self-made islands of achievement, the poor know the truth. Humans are social animals, and survival is a team sport played against a system rigged for their failure. As you drift to sleep in a tangle of limbs and shared warmth, you're already subconsciously calculating tomorrow's contributions to the collective. In this one aspect, at least, Victorian poverty has provided a harsh education in social economics that the wealthy will never understand. But your cooperative survival strategies won't help if the neighborhood itself is killing you. Time to learn how to navigate the urban geography of death. 7. Find the cleanest filth you can. Morning breaks in Victorian London with its signature perfume, odor sewage with notes of industrial waste and hints of decomposition. But as you step into the streets, your finely tuned survival instincts are already mapping the invisible geography of death around you. Not all filth is created equal, and knowing which stenches will merely make you gag versus which ones will actually kill you is the difference between surviving the week or becoming an anonymous statistic. Welcome to the Victorian real estate game, where location refers not to property values, but to mortality rates. You won't find this information in any guidebook or newspaper advertisement, but the poor have developed an intricate mental map of London's death zones, neighborhoods ranked not by prestige, but by their likelihood of sending you to an early grave. The slums have their own hierarchy, a fact completely missed by well-meaning social reformers who lump all poor areas into one malodorous category. But you know better. Jacob's Island in Bermondsey, with its open sewers running directly beneath housing, sits at the bottom of this grim ranking. The rookeries of St. Giles falls somewhere in the middle, dreadful but survivable with the right precautions. The slightly elevated areas of Clerkenwell, while still abysmal by any objective standard, represent the premium tier of affordable squalor. Your current lodging sits on a slight incline, a geographical feature invisible to the casual observer, but crucial to your continued existence. When it rains, the filth flows downhill, away from your building rather than into it. The family paying the same rent, 3 doors down, experiences flooding with every heavy rainfall as sewage backs up through their floorboards. Their children suffer twice the disease rate of yours. Geography is destiny, especially when you measure elevation in inches rather than feet. Airflow becomes your atmospheric currency. Streets that align with prevailing winds experience periodic, blessed flushing of accumulated stench. Those built perpendicular to wind patterns become miasmic death traps where toxic air stagnates for weeks. The difference is invisible on any map, but measured in mortality rates that vary dramatically from one street to the next. The wily veterans of urban survival seek corner buildings with windows on 2 sides, allowing for cross-ventilation, the closest thing to an HVAC system the poor will ever experience. Interior rooms, with no outside windows, are cheaper for good reason. They're essentially slow execution chambers, where stale air incubates whatever pathogens previous tenants have contributed to the environment. Sunshine, that rare London commodity, becomes a matter of life or death. North-facing rooms cost less because they receive less direct sunlight. Those few precious hours when ultraviolet rays actually penetrate the industrial haze have an unquantified but very real disinfecting effect. Rooms that receive even an hour of direct sunlight daily see measurably lower rates of consumption than their permanently shadowed counterparts. The wealthy seek southern exposures for pleasant morning light. You seek them because they might actually kill some of the bacteria trying to kill you. The proximity calculus becomes increasingly complex as you consider other environmental factors. Living near a slaughterhouse means a constant cloud of rotting offal and swarms of disease-carrying flies. But the waste runoff at least flows consistently in one direction, making it somewhat predictable. Tanneries produce caustic chemicals that burn the lungs but also kill some airborne pathogens, a trade-off that might be worthwhile during cholera season. Breweries generate their own foul odors, but tend to have better waste management than most industries. Each environmental poison presents its own risk-reward equation. Cesspools, those delightful underground chambers where waste collects until night soil men eventually empty them, create invisible danger zones throughout the city. The savvy poor learn to identify telltale signs, the slight discoloration of exterior walls where waste has seeped through foundations, the particular quality of dampness in nearby cellars, the specific species of insects that thrive in proximity to human excrement. A rental might seem promising until you notice the subtle indicators of a cesspool directly below, or worse, one that's been forgotten and left to seep into surrounding soil for decades. The sewer system, grand Victorian achievement that it is, creates its own geographical hierarchy. Streets with newer connections to main sewer lines experience less backflow during heavy rains. Areas with inadequate drainage become impromptu cesspools whenever the Thames rises. The poor develop an encyclopedic knowledge of which streets flood first and which remain passable, information worth more than gold when waste-contaminated water starts rising through floorboards. Chimney placement determines another layer of livability. Neighborhoods where prevailing winds carry coal smoke away rather than through residential areas offer marginally better air quality. Living downwind from a factory or power plant means constant exposure to industrial effluent. Living upwind might mean the difference between debilitating respiratory disease at 40 versus 50, a decade of productivity worth calculating into any housing decision. Public toilets, a relatively new and unevenly distributed amenity, create their own geography of necessity. Knowing which are merely disgusting versus which are actively dangerous with crumbling floors and overflow issues becomes crucial knowledge. Some charge entry fees beyond the means of the poorest. Others are free, but so revolting that using them represents a significant health gamble. The distribution of these facilities creates invisible maps of possibility and restriction across London's poorer districts. Water sources dictate settlement patterns among the informed poor. The public pump on Broad Street killed hundreds during the 1854 cholera outbreak, but 3 streets away, another pump connected to a different water table remained safe. No official signs mark these distinctions, but the collective memory of the poor preserves this life-saving information. Particular wells gain reputations for good water versus bad water based on generations of trial, error, and consequent death. The truly desperate innovate within these constraints. Rooftop dwellers, technically trespassers, but rarely evicted due to the difficulty of accessing their makeshift shelters, create aerial neighborhoods above the worst of the stench. Basement residents install ingenious drainage systems using scavenged materials, creating slightly less lethal living spaces than their neighbors. Everyone becomes an amateur environmental engineer by necessity. The most successful navigators of this toxic landscape develop what amounts to a sixth sense, the ability to detect subtle environmental cues that signal danger or relative safety. They can tell by the specific quality of morning dampness whether a room will develop black mold. They gauge soil quality around foundations to predict flooding risks. They track seasonal wind patterns to anticipate when certain areas will become temporarily uninhabitable as industrial emissions shift direction. This environmental intelligence becomes particularly crucial during London's infamous fogs, those yellow-brown miasmas when coal smoke, factory emissions and natural mist combine into a toxic soup that can kill the vulnerable within hours. The poor develop predictive systems for these events, noting the specific combination of weather conditions, industrial activity, and Thames behavior that precedes the deadliest fogs. When these signs appear, those who can retreat indoors, sealing windows with rags and breathing through vinegar-soaked cloths until the air clears. Your own mental map of London becomes increasingly sophisticated as you navigate these invisible dangers. You know which public spaces offer relatively cleaner air, certain parks where particular tree species actually improve air quality, specific riverside locations where prevailing winds create pockets of temporary freshness. You learn which market streets to avoid on particular days when waste removal happens or doesn't. You discover the precise times when certain areas become temporarily less toxic, early mornings in industrial zones before factories begin operations, evenings in commercial districts after coal fires diminish. The most valuable knowledge concerns the microgeography of public health interventions. Some neighborhoods have benefited from primitive sanitation improvements, street washing, waste collection, drain installation, while visually identical adjacent areas remain untouched by reform. These distinctions create mortality differences invisible to outsiders, but painfully obvious in the lifespans of residents. As you make your way through the streets, you instinctively adjust your route to avoid the worst danger zones. The slaughterhouse alley currently draining blood and entrails onto the street, the row of buildings where night soil collection has been delayed for over a week, the particular corner where several sewage lines converge beneath cracked paving stones. These navigational choices aren't conscious anymore. They've become instinctive survival mechanisms honed through years of environmental negotiation. The wealthy travel through London in sealed carriages, experiencing the city as a series of discrete destinations. You experience it as a continuous terrain of invisible threats requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. They see a unified metropolis. You see a patchwork of microenvironments, each with its own particular blend of hazards requiring specialized survival techniques. This is perhaps the most fundamental division between classes in Victorian London, not just income or opportunity, but entirely different perceptual relationships with the same physical space. The city that might kill you through 1,000 environmental vectors appears benign or merely unpleasant to those with resources to buffer themselves from its realities. As night falls and you return to your lodging, selected for its slight elevation, southeastern exposure, and position upwind from the nearest cesspool, you calculate tomorrow's environmental navigation. A new tannery has opened 2 streets over. You'll need to recalibrate your usual route. There's talk of a building collapse on Cable Street that might have broken a sewer line. Rainfall is expected, which will make the usual shortcut through the alley behind the butcher shop temporarily impassable. This constant environmental calculation is exhausting but necessary. In Victorian London, geography is fate, and knowing which filth might kill you versus which is merely disgusting becomes the most practical education you'll ever receive. But sometimes even the most careful navigation can't protect you from a city designed to extract maximum profit from its human resources. When everything around you becomes toxic waste, sometimes the only solution is to transform that waste into survival. 8. Turn trash into treasure. Dawn breaks murky and reluctant over the Thames, finding you knee-deep in toxic mud that would make modern hazmat teams run screaming for decontamination showers. Congratulations! You've joined the ranks of London's mudlarks, the human seagulls who scavenge the river's edge at low tide for anything that might postpone starvation for another day. Victorian London produces waste on an industrial scale, and where the privileged see filth, the desperately poor see opportunity. Welcome to the bottom rung of the Victorian recycling industry, where human scavengers transform society's refuse into their own survival. It's sustainability driven not by environmental consciousness, but by the raw mathematics of starvation. Your fellow mudlarks are predominantly children. They're smaller, lighter bodies, less likely to sink into the treacherous riverbed. Their fingers nimble enough to extract treasures from the sludge. The mud itself is a noxious cocktail of industrial chemicals, human waste, and decomposing organic matter. The smell would fell an unprepared visitor, but your nostrils have long since negotiated a ceasefire with your gag reflex. Today's low tide has exposed a promising stretch near a wharf where coal barges unload. You're hunting primarily for coal fragments, tiny bits that fall between planks during delivery. A good haul might fill a small bucket with these black nuggets, worth perhaps 3 pence when dried, enough to buy bread for the day. The competition is fierce. Other mudlarks have already claimed the prime territory closer to the wharf. You'll work the margins, where pickings are slimmer but still better than nothing. The hierarchy of river scavenging has evolved with Darwinian precision. Mudlarks focus on coal, nails, copper bits, and occasionally coins. Toshers, a rank above you in the scavenging aristocracy, specialize in the sewers rather than the open riverbed, hunting for more valuable metal objects, flushed into the waste system. They earn more but die younger, succumbing to toxic gases or being swept away when sudden rainfall causes flash flooding through the underground channels. It's a classic Victorian career trade-off. Better wages versus marginally postponed death. Higher still are the pure finders, usually women who collect dog excrement for the tanning industry. The pure, an ironic Victorian euphemism for dog feces, contains chemicals useful in leather processing. A good day's collection might yield 9 pence, 3 times your potential earnings as a mudlark, but the social stigma is severe. Pure finders are considered untouchable, even within the working class. Their hands are permanently stained, their clothing permeated with an unmistakable odor. Even in the economy of waste, status consciousness creates rigid divisions. Bone pickers occupy yet another niche, collecting animal and occasionally human bones from streets, dumps, and river edges. These are sold to fertilizer manufacturers, who grind them for phosphates, or to sugar refineries, which use bone char as a whitening agent. Next time you admire the pristine whiteness of refined sugar, remember it likely passed through the hands of a 9-year-old who pulled its filtering agent from a heap of putrefying waste. The most specialized scavengers are the sewer hunters, who navigate London's underground waste channels by candlelight, searching for coins, jewelry, and metal objects. They wear wooden platforms strapped to their feet to stay above the flowing excrement and develop an encyclopedic knowledge of the sewer system's deadly gas pockets. Their earnings can reach a princely 2 shillings per day, but their life expectancy rarely extends past 40, and they carry the unmistakable sewer stench that makes them as socially isolated as if they had leprosy. Your own family operates as a scavenging unit with specialized roles. Your youngest sister sorts through kitchen waste behind restaurants, collecting vegetable trimmings and meat scraps. Your brother works construction sites for nail, wood, and metal fragments. Your mother picks through textile factory discards for usable fiber. Together, you form a waste processing enterprise that would impress modern recycling advocates if they could get past the horrifying implications. The economics are brutally straightforward. The rag and bone shop pays by weight for sorted materials, a penny per pound for clean rags, threepence for copper, halfpenny for glass bottles. A family working from dawn until dusk might collect enough to earn a shilling, barely sufficient for lodging and food that day. Nothing accumulates. This is subsistence scavenging without the luxury of saving or investment. The true innovation happens after collection. Your lodging house has become an improvised processing facility. In one corner, coal fragments dry on newspaper. In another, bent nails are straightened with scavenged hammers for resale. At the single table, your sister sorts buttons by material and quality. Your father repairs damaged tools found in dumps, transforming broken implements into marginally functional ones that can be sold for pennies to those even poorer than yourselves. Competition for prime scavenging territory creates complex social arrangements. Certain streets belong to specific families or groups. Trespassing on another's collecting ground might result in violent enforcement of these unwritten boundaries. The dust heaps, massive mounds of civilian and industrial waste that punctuate London's poorer districts, operate under strictly observed territorial claims. The most productive sites are inherited through families like precious birthrights. The Thames itself has invisible boundaries known only to regular scavengers. The stretch near the slaughterhouses provides bones, but dangers include blood-contaminated mud that causes festering wounds. The area downstream from textile mills might yield cloth scraps, but contains dye chemicals that burn skin on contact. Each segment requires specialized knowledge and techniques, expertise as developed and precise as any professional skill, though never recognized as such. Disease is the constant companion of waste workers. Tetanus from rusty metal, tuberculosis from contaminated dust, typhoid from waste-tainted water, minor cuts become infected with industrial chemicals, skin conditions develop from constant exposure to toxic substances. The dust lung of waste sorters parallels the black lung of coal miners, respiratory systems destroyed by the materials that enable survival. It's a cruel equation. The work that feeds you simultaneously kills you just slowly enough to extract maximum labor before disposal. Your own hands tell the story. Nails permanently black with grime, cuts that never fully heal, a network of scars from encounters with broken glass and jagged metal. You've lost sensitivity in 3 fingers from repeated chemical exposure. At 18, your body already shows the wear of an elderly laborer, but you're luckier than most. You still have all your limbs and reasonable eyesight. In the economy of waste, this makes you practically privileged. The most remarkable aspect of this system is its invisible integration with respectable commerce. The bone char that whitens sugar in aristocratic teacups comes through your hands. The reconstituted paper that becomes government documents contains fibers you've salvaged. The renovated homes of the middle class incorporate nails that children straightened by candlelight. An entire shadow economy processes London's waste into raw materials that re-enter the legitimate market, laundered through a system that keeps the dirty origins conveniently distant from the final product. Victorian London's waste-picking economy creates a perfect closed system. The poor salvage the discards of the wealthy, transform them into usable resources through unpaid labor, then sell them back to industry at prices that keep them in poverty. It's recycling as exploitation, environmental efficiency driven, not by conscience, but by the extractive logic of industrial capitalism. As the tide begins to rise, you make a final sweep of your section. Today's haul is mediocre. Half a bucket of coal fragments, some copper wire, 3 intact bottles, and an unlikely treasure, a pewter spoon that might fetch a whole penny on its own. You'll earn enough for bread and perhaps candles, but not both. The sun, such as it is through London's perpetual haze, has reached midday position. Time to deliver your finds to the rag and bone shop, where the owner will claim they're worth less than yesterday due to market conditions that never seem to improve. You'll accept whatever he offers because arguing means risking your access to this vital link in your survival chain. This is Victorian recycling, not the voluntary virtue signaling of modern environmentalism, but desperate necessity elevated to economic system. You don't scavenge waste because you care about resource conservation. You do it because the alternative is watching your siblings starve. The circular economy was invented not by sustainability consultants, but by the Victorian poor transforming systemic waste into marginal survival. As you trudge away from the river, your clothes sodden and reeking, respectable Londoners give you a wide berth on the street. The physical manifestation of your labor, the stench of salvage, makes you socially invisible, except as an object of disgust. The very people who benefit from your waste transformation pretend you don't exist, or worse, regard you as part of the waste itself. But in a system designed to extract maximum value while providing minimum support, sometimes the only way to survive is to understand how to manipulate its rules, or bypass them entirely. The waste economy provides a bare subsistence to thrive, or even just survive a bit longer. You'll need to master the art of working both within and around the system that would prefer to simply work you to death. 9. Use the system, or beat it. The rain is seeping through your roof again. Your youngest has a cough that's keeping the entire family awake. and you've just been laid off from the factory because you had the audacity to turn 40 and therefore become inefficient. Congratulations, you've hit the Victorian poverty jackpot, and now you face the ultimate survival question. Do you throw yourself on the dubious mercy of official assistance, or do you find creative ways to circumvent a system designed to punish you for being poor? Victorian England has created the world's first comprehensive welfare system, and somehow managed to make it so horrific that death sometimes seems the more appealing option. The 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act, that masterpiece of bureaucratic cruelty, established the principle that poverty relief should be less desirable than the worst possible employment. In practice, this means the safety net is deliberately designed to be a bed of spikes. At the center of this system stands the workhouse, that architectural manifestation of Victorian values regarding the undeserving poor. Imagine a prison where your crime is economic failure, and your sentence is breaking rocks, picking oakum, unraveling old ropes until your fingers bleed, or turning giant treadwheels for 10 hours daily, while subsisting on gruel that would make Oliver Twist's portion seem generous. All this while being separated from your family, dressed in humiliating uniforms, subjected to prison-like discipline, and constantly reminded that your poverty is a moral failing rather than a structural inevitability. The workhouse isn't meant to help you, it's meant to deter you from seeking help at all. Its architects quite literally designed it to be so unpleasant that only the truly desperate would enter, and it works. You're starving, but you're still calculating whether starvation might be preferable to workhouse admission. This is Victorian welfare working exactly as intended. But the poor have developed sophisticated strategies for navigating, manipulating, and circumventing this punitive system. The first rule of Victorian welfare survival: know exactly what you're entitled to without letting the authorities know you know. Parish relief, outdoor assistance provided without workhouse admission, still exists despite official discouragement. But it's deliberately kept complex, inconsistent, and obscure to minimize claims. The true experts in working this system are women, particularly widows with children. They've mastered the precise balance of deference and persistence needed when approaching poor law guardians. Too desperate, and they'll be sent straight to the workhouse. Too capable seeming, and they'll be denied aid entirely. The performance requires precise calibration, clean but visibly worn clothing, a manner showing both respectability and genuine need. Children present, but subdued. It's theater with survival as the prize. Strategic misinformation becomes essential. Many women claim to be widows when their husbands have actually abandoned them or been transported to colonies, knowing that deserted wives are treated more harshly than respectable widows. Others temporarily widow themselves when husbands are away seeking work, knowing that a woman alone with children might receive parish relief that would be denied to a family with an able-bodied man. The authorities call this fraud. The poor call it survival adaptation. The documentation game requires its own expertise. Proving settlement, legal residence in a parish that creates eligibility for relief means navigating Byzantine requirements for birth certificates, marriage licenses, employment histories, and residency verification. The poor maintain these precious papers through numerous moves and disasters, often storing them in tin boxes or oilcloth wrappings to protect them from the omnipresent damp of cheap lodgings. When official relief proves inadequate or inaccessible, the shadow welfare system emerges, a complex network of alternative support mechanisms. Pawnbrokers become the unofficial bankers of the poor, offering secured loans against household items that cycle in and out of pawn with predictable regularity. Monday morning sees the Sunday clothes being pawned to provide money for the week. Saturday's wages, if they materialize, go toward redeeming them for church attendance, maintaining the appearance of respectability. This pawnbroker economy has its own seasonal rhythms. Winter sees blankets and heavier clothing cycling through pawn, creating the cruel paradox that these essential items are often absent from homes precisely when most needed. The interest rates are extortionate by middle-class standards, often 20 to 30%, but represent the only credit available to those without bank access or collateral property. The 3 brass balls hanging outside the pawn shop become both salvation and symbol of perpetual indebtedness. Every item in a poor household has its precisely calculated pawn value. The teapot might bring 6pence, the husband's tools a shilling, the family Bible, often the only book owned, perhaps 2 shillings in desperate times. These mental calculations run constantly as families navigate weekly and seasonal financial pressures. The poor don't have bank accounts, but they can quote the exact liquidation value of every possession with accountant-like precision. Friendly societies and burial clubs form another layer of this parallel welfare structure. By pooling minimal weekly contributions, members create insurance against unemployment, sickness, or death. The burial club particularly reveals Victorian priorities. Many will starve themselves further to maintain payments, knowing the ultimate social shame is a pauper's funeral and the dissection table that often follows. These mutual aid societies operate on principles completely counter to Victorian individualism, creating collective safety nets through working-class solidarity. Members pay pennies weekly into common funds that provide 5 to 10 shillings weekly to those who fall ill, often the difference between temporary hardship and permanent destitution. The middle-class observers who condemn the poor for improvidence entirely miss these sophisticated financial strategies operating beneath their notice. The Catholic Church operates its own welfare network alongside and often in opposition to the official Protestant system. For Irish immigrants particularly, the parish priest often serves as welfare officer, housing advisor, employment bureau, and legal advocate. This sectarian support network remains largely invisible to official Victorian society, but provides crucial resources for communities systematically excluded from public assistance. Jewish communities maintain perhaps the most developed parallel welfare system, with burial societies, interest-free loan associations, and communal kitchens operating entirely independently from state structures. This self-sufficiency, born of necessity and exclusion, creates resilience that baffles social reformers who cannot understand how communities they perceive as impoverished manage to care for their vulnerable members without recourse to public assistance. When these semi-legitimate options fail, the poor move further into the grey economy. Children become street sellers, offering matches, flowers, or bootlaces, token items that provide a veneer of commerce over what is essentially begging. The law prohibits outright solicitation, but permits these minimal commercial transactions, creating the absurd situation where a hungry child must carry inventory and make change rather than simply ask for food. The performance of disability becomes another survival strategy. Ex-soldiers exaggerate war injuries. The partially blind pretend complete sightlessness. Those with minor mobility issues display themselves as completely crippled. It's not fraud from their perspective, but tactical deployment of limited resources, using the only capital they possess, public sympathy for specific categories of misfortune to secure subsistence. More creative approaches abound. Women temporarily place children with slightly better off relatives during inspector visits, reducing their visible family size to appear less destitute and more deserving of limited parish resources. Men cultivate strategic relationships with church wardens and parish officials, providing information or political support in exchange for preferential treatment when relief is distributed. The network of intelligence sharing would impress military strategists. Information about which parishes have more generous outdoor relief policies spreads through servant networks, maids and cooks, carrying news between households about which poor law guardians might be sympathetic to certain types of cases. Laundresses, who move between social worlds while remaining invisible to their employers, become particularly valuable conduits for welfare intelligence, warning communities about unexpected inspector visits or changes in relief qualification requirements. The most desperate families engage in calculated family separation, placing children as servants or apprentices, sending older members to live with relatives, occasionally even using the workhouse strategically for limited periods during the harshest winter months. These decisions tear at familial bonds, but reflect cold mathematical assessment of survival chances. Children become strategic assets deployed with calculating precision. A 10-year-old might earn 3 shillings weekly in a factory, potentially more than an aging parent. A daughter placed in domestic service can save her entire room and board cost, while perhaps sending home a few pence from wages. Even very young children contribute through street selling, scavenging, or simply reducing their own consumption to protect family resources. Victorian sentimentality about childhood innocence exists in inverse proportion to actual children's lived experiences. Legal knowledge becomes a precious commodity, transmitted through informal networks in pubs, laundries, and markets. Which parishes have more generous relief policies? Which magistrates are more sympathetic to certain types of cases? Which workhouses are marginally less hellish than others? This information circulates as valuable intelligence. The poor develop a parallel legal expertise out of necessity, becoming adept at navigating systems explicitly designed to exclude them. Women transform their reproductive capacity into economic strategy, not through the middle-class practice of strategic marriage, but through calculated presentation of children to authorities. A visibly pregnant woman stands a better chance of receiving outdoor relief than an able-bodied single woman. A nursing mother with a newborn commands greater sympathy than one with only older children. These biological facts become tactical advantages in the negotiation for survival resources. The geography of relief creates migration patterns invisible to authorities. Families move strategically between parishes based on shifting relief policies, seeking more generous outdoor assistance or more lenient settlement requirements. These poverty migrations follow precise intelligence about which poor law unions are more likely to provide food rather than workhouse admission, creating demographic shifts driven entirely by survival calculations. Letter writing becomes a specialized skill, with certain individuals in poor communities becoming known for their ability to craft persuasive appeals to authorities. These informal scribes might receive payment in food or services for composing requests that strike the perfect balance between desperation and respectability. The language deploys precisely calibrated deference, strategic religious references, and carefully constructed narratives of temporary misfortune rather than chronic need. Temporary identity manipulation emerges as another tactic. Accents are modified depending on the audience. Irish immigrants might emphasize or suppress their brogues depending on whether a particular parish official is known to be sympathetic or hostile to the Irish. Clothing is borrowed to create impressions of greater or lesser poverty depending on the specific relief being sought. Names might be slightly altered when applying to different parishes to avoid being identified as previous applicants elsewhere. For the truly desperate, there's another option entirely: crime. Not the romantic gentleman thief variety popular in penny dreadfuls, but the grinding, petty illegality of survival. Prostitution becomes the final economic refuge for thousands of women, while men turn to pocket-picking, small-scale theft, and fencing stolen goods. The Victorian justice system responds with theatrical cruelty, transportations, executions, and prison terms wildly disproportionate to the offences. But when the choice is between certain starvation within the law or possible survival outside it, many make the rational calculation. The ultimate form of system manipulation becomes emigration, the desperate gamble that life in colonies might offer marginally better chances than slow death in London's slums. Government programs periodically offer free passage to Australia, Canada, or New Zealand, presenting these opportunities as benevolent population relief rather than convenient export of poverty. For many, this becomes the final roll of the survival dice, a one-way journey to unknown territories that might offer actual opportunity or merely different varieties of exploitation. Throughout all these strategies runs a common thread. The poor understand the system designed to control them far better than the system understands the poor. They recognize its moral pretensions, bureaucratic weaknesses, and practical limitations. They exploit its inconsistencies, navigate its blind spots, and create parallel structures where official ones fail. The true Victorian values emerge not in parliamentary debates or charitable society meetings, but in these sophisticated survival strategies of those deemed least capable by their betters. The poor demonstrate resourcefulness, community solidarity, strategic thinking, and adaptability that would be celebrated as entrepreneurial virtue in any other context. Instead, these same qualities are condemned as manipulation, dependency, or outright criminality when deployed by those without property or power. As you contemplate your own approach to this rigged system, you calculate risk against reward with the precision of a stock market speculator, though your capital consists only of your limited energy, truthfulness, and dignity. Will you present yourself at the parish office, carefully calibrating your appearance to suggest respectability fallen on temporary hard times? Will you join the shadow economies of scavenging or street selling, or will you risk everything on more desperate measures? This is the impossible choice Victorian poverty forces upon you, not whether to work hard or be lazy, as moralists would have it, but which specific strategy of system engagement or evasion offers the best statistical chance of survival for you and those who depend on you. And whatever approach you choose, you'll need to maintain a carefully constructed facade to navigate a world determined to find you either pitiful or threatening, but never simply human. Speaking of facades, let's examine another crucial survival strategy: keeping up appearances when everything around you, including your own body, is literally falling apart. 10. Hide the smell and yourself. The interview for a serving position starts in 30 minutes. Your clothes are threadbare but meticulously brushed. Your hands are scrubbed raw to remove embedded grime from yesterday's scavenging. The lingering aroma of your tenement, that distinct bouquet of sewage, mold, and too many bodies in too little space, clings to you like an invisible shroud. Welcome to the Victorian poor's daily performance art, pretending you don't exist in the conditions you actually inhabit. In a society obsessed with cleanliness as next to godliness, convenient, since both remain equally inaccessible to the poor, personal hygiene becomes less about health and more about moral theatre. The wealthy don't just want to avoid disease, they want to avoid acknowledging the conditions that breed it. Your job is to become invisible as a source of contagion while remaining visible as a source of labor. It's quite the balancing act. The morning ablution ritual would mystify modern observers with its intricate workarounds for basic resources most take for granted. No running water, no problem. You've perfected the art of the flannel wash. A damp cloth rubbed with the smallest sliver of harsh yellow soap stretched to clean face, neck, hands, and perhaps armpits if you're feeling luxurious. The same water serves the entire family, growing progressively darker as it passes from father to mother to children in descending age order. Soap itself is a calculated expense. The cheapest yellow soap burns skin and strips natural oils, leaving hands cracked and bleeding, a liability for domestic service positions where employers expect invisibly clean servants, not visibly damaged ones. Better quality soap costs more but might make the difference in securing employment. The calculation becomes mathematical. How many meals can you skip to afford the soap that might help you get the job that will eventually allow you to eat? The truly desperate innovate with disturbing creativity. Chimney ash, mixed with water, provides abrasive cleaning for hands blackened by coal dust. Urine, natural ammonia, becomes laundry detergent when soap is unaffordable. Vinegar diluted in water serves as deodorant, hair rinse, and general disinfectant. Sand scoured from construction sites works as tooth powder. These aren't fragrant or gentle solutions, but they're free, and free trumps pleasant in the Victorian poverty economy. Clothing maintenance becomes an art form, requiring skills that would impress modern conservators. You own perhaps 2 outfits: workday clothes and Sunday best, reserved for church, interviews or court appearances. These precious garments must last years, enduring daily wear, harsh cleaning methods, and storage in damp conditions. The expertise developed in extending their lifespan is remarkable. Invisible mending, using thread pulled from hidden seams, strategic patching on inside surfaces, careful brushing instead of washing to preserve fabric integrity, application of kitchen grease to hide stains on dark materials. Strategic scenting replaces actual cleanliness when the latter proves impossible. Bundles of dried herbs, whatever can be salvaged from parks or markets, are tucked into clothing to mask bodily odors. Lavender for those who can afford it, mint, rosemary, or even crushed citrus peels for those who can't. During consumption outbreaks, aromatic vinegars are carried in small bottles, occasionally sniffed or sprinkled on handkerchiefs as supposed protection against miasma, less medical treatment than olfactory distraction. Hair presents particular challenges. Without regular washing, it becomes a battlefield of oil, dirt, and parasites. Women develop elaborate combing regimens, using fine-tooth combs to remove lice, while preserving whatever styling might distract from the lack of washing. Men adopt shorter styles when possible, making maintenance simpler. For significant events like job interviews, women might use flour to absorb oil and create the illusion of cleanliness, an expensive solution using precious cooking ingredients for cosmetic purposes, but sometimes necessary for securing employment. Teeth tell the cruelest story of poverty's physical impact. By 20, many poor Victorians have already lost several to decay or amateur extraction. The wealthy associate bad teeth with moral failing rather than nutritional deficit and lack of dental care. For public-facing positions, this creates impossible standards. Servants, shopgirls, and anyone interacting with better classes must somehow maintain dental presentation with no actual dental care. Many practice closed-mouth smiles or speaking without fully opening their lips, physical techniques to hide dental deterioration during critical interactions with potential employers or authorities. The tyranny of small details governs every public appearance. Fingernails must appear clean despite work that embeds grime under them. This often means scrubbing with harsh brushes until the flesh beneath the nails bleeds, removing dirt along with skin. Collars and cuffs, the most visible portions of clothing, receive disproportionate attention, sometimes being replaced entirely, while the main garment continues deteriorating beneath an outer layer. Shoes, those most betraying indicators of economic status, are polished with candle wax or even spit when proper blacking is unaffordable. Children undergo rigorous preparation before any contact with authorities or potential benefactors. Faces are scrubbed beyond comfort, hair plastered down with water, clothing adjusted to hide the worst wear. They're rehearsed in proper speech patterns and responses, temporarily elevated from street dialect to whatever approximation of proper English their parents can manage to teach. The gaps between their public performance and private reality create early lessons in social code switching that follow them throughout life. The language of cleanliness becomes coded class signaling. Phrases like respectable poor or deserving poor don't just indicate moral judgment, they specifically reference those who manage to maintain the appearance of cleanliness despite their circumstances. To be dirty poor represents absolute condemnation, closing doors to charity, employment, and social mobility. This creates the perverse situation where famished families spend precious resources on soap rather than food, knowing that visible cleanliness might eventually secure the employment that ends hunger, while temporary satiation at the cost of appearance leads to longer-term starvation. Public spaces demand particular performance skills. The poor learn precise routes through London that minimize contact with authorities or the judgmental middle classes. They develop urban invisibility techniques, walking neither too fast, suggesting criminal intent, nor too slow, suggesting vagrancy, maintaining downcast eyes without appearing shifty, occupying as little space as possible, while moving purposefully enough to avoid loitering accusations. It's choreography designed around not being seen by those with power to make their existence even more difficult. Even breathing becomes a calculated act in certain company. The poor learn to breathe shallowly in proximity to the wealthy, minimizing the potential offense of their breath, which carries the evidence of dietary deficiency, dental decay, and often hunger-induced ketosis. They position themselves downwind when possible in conversations with social superiors. They cultivate small breath-masking habits, keeping mint leaves in cheeks, chewing parsley when available, timing swallows and exhalations to minimize olfactory impact during critical interactions. The performance extends to dwelling spaces when necessary, when visitors of consequence might enter, rent collectors, potential employers checking references, parish officials, rooms undergo frantic transformation. Beds that sleep six are temporarily disassembled and hidden, suggesting less crowded conditions. Multiple families who share a single room temporarily relocate, creating the fiction of one family per room rather than the reality of one family per corner. Windows normally sealed against cold are opened regardless of weather, prioritizing temporary air freshening over sustained warmth. Street sellers perfect the art of selective cleanliness, keeping hands and faces remarkably clean while their clothing deteriorates, understanding that customers will touch food sold by clean hands from dirty sleeves but reject the reverse. They develop product displays that draw attention away from their own appearance, arranging wares to create visual barriers between their customers and their poverty. The merchandise, however humble, becomes both livelihood and shield. The intricate relationship between cleanliness, morality, and employment creates impossible double binds. Domestic service positions, among the few available to women, require standards of cleanliness impossible to maintain in slum housing, yet without such employment, escape from those conditions remains impossible. Factory workers need clean appearances to secure positions in establishments that will immediately coat them in industrial grime and provide no washing facilities. The system demands cleanliness while systematically denying access to the resources that make it possible. For those dealing with authorities, strategic dishevelment sometimes replaces the usual careful presentation. When seeking certain types of charity or parish relief, appearing too clean or well-kept suggests you don't really need assistance. This creates the perverse requirement to calibrate your appearance downward, but not too far down, as extreme squalor triggers moral judgment rather than material help. The sweet spot involves looking poor enough to need aid but clean enough to deserve it, a narrow target requiring precise social calculation. Privacy, that middle-class luxury, becomes another casualty of poverty. Personal ablutions take place in full view of family members in single-room dwellings. Communal toilets serve dozens of people, often without doors or partitions. Public bathhouses, when affordable at a penny per person, offer the rare luxury of individual bathing, but at the cost of sharing water with strangers before you, and having attendants monitor your time to ensure maximum efficiency. The poor learn to create psychological privacy where physical privacy is impossible, developing the 1,000-yard stare that allows one to mentally exit shared spaces. The geography of cleanliness shapes urban movement patterns. Public pumps become social centers where information exchanges while water is collected. Public toilets, rare, often coin-operated, and frequently unusable, create invisible maps of possibility for those needing facilities when away from home. Public bathhouses serve as weekly destinations for those who can afford them, creating temporary communities of the respectable poor who prioritize cleanliness enough to budget for it. Each of these locations requires specific performance skills, the appropriate deference at philanthropic bathhouses, the swift efficiency at overcrowded pumps, the calculated timing of public toilet use to avoid both crowds and authorities. Laundry, that most basic cleanliness maintenance, becomes logistically overwhelming without facilities. A single washing might require carrying water from a distant pump, heating it on coals that cost precious pennies, scrubbing with harsh soap that damages both fabric and skin, finding drying space in overcrowded quarters, and ironing with flat irons heated on the same expensive coals. The labor investment for a family's laundry might represent an entire day of productive work lost. But going without means visibly announcing your poverty and potentially losing employment opportunities. Behind closed doors, if you're fortunate enough to have them, the performances briefly pause. Exhausted bodies collapse from the strain of constant self-monitoring. Women massage feet, deformed by ill-fitting shoes worn to maintain appearances. Men finally acknowledge injuries hidden during work to avoid replacement. Children momentarily abandon the careful speech patterns drilled into them for public use. The constant vigilance of public presentation takes physical and psychological tolls rarely acknowledged by social observers who see only the successful performance or its failure. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of Victorian poverty, not just material deprivation, but the requirement to pretend it isn't happening, to exist in conditions that inevitably produce visible evidence of suffering, while being judged for allowing that evidence to become visible. To navigate a society that creates poverty while despising the poor for being impoverished. As you finish your preparations for the interview, dabbing your neck with borrowed rosewater to mask the unavoidable tenement smell, you're not just seeking employment, you're engaging in the daily resistance of refusing to become what poverty is supposed to make you, the act of maintenance, of fighting to remain presentable despite systematic obstacles to cleanliness, becomes itself a declaration that you are more than your circumstances. The wealthy Victorian sees your clean collar and assumes moral virtue. They never see the calculations behind it, the meals skipped to afford soap, the sleep sacrificed to wash clothes before dawn, the raw hands scrubbed until they bleed to remove embedded grime. They see the performance without understanding the production costs. And that perhaps is the point. To remain human in their eyes, you must hide everything that would reveal the inhuman conditions of your existence. But sometimes, even the most careful performance can't overcome the vertical challenges of Victorian survival. When the streets themselves become unlivable, the poor innovate upward, creating survival spaces in the city's most overlooked dimension. 11. When the streets kill, live on the roofs. The summer heat has turned your third-floor room into Satan's personal sauna. The stench from below rises like a physical entity, a noxious cocktail of sewage, rot, and too many unwashed bodies competing for too little oxygen. Police are cleaning the streets again, which means beating anyone desperate enough to attempt sleeping in public spaces. You've been awake for 3 days, trapped between indoor suffocation and outdoor criminalization. But tonight, you've found salvation in the one direction Victorian London rarely thinks to look up. Welcome to London's invisible vertical slums, the rooftop communities that exist literally above the notice of authorities, reformers, and the comfortable classes. While urban planners conceptualize the city as a two-dimensional grid and social researchers map poverty horizontally across neighborhoods, the truly desperate have colonized the third dimension, creating precarious havens among chimney pots and behind parapet walls. Your initiation to roof living comes through Mrs. O'Brien from the top floor, who's noticed your increasingly zombie-like state. At sunset, she beckons you to follow her up a final hidden ladder through a hatch disguised as ceiling repair. You emerge onto a flat expanse of tarred roofing, surrounded by a low brick parapet, invisible from the street below, but offering surprising space above. And you're not alone. A dozen makeshift shelters huddle between chimney stacks. Lines of drying laundry stretch between ventilation pipes. A small garden of scraggly herbs grows in broken crockery. You've discovered London's vertical village, the ultimate example of real estate's golden rule: location, location, elevation. The rooftop demographics follow their own brutal logic. The elderly rarely make it up the precarious access routes, while young children present too much risk of falls or noise that might attract attention from below. Instead, you find working teenagers, single women avoiding street predators, men escaping debt collectors, and families with older children who've been evicted but remain employed. This isn't the community of absolute destitution found in street homelessness. These are the working poor who have jobs, but no legal claim to space. They haven't fallen through society's cracks. They've deliberately climbed through them. The architecture of roof survival emerges from desperate innovation that would impress any engineer forced to work with garbage. Lean-tos constructed against chimney stacks provide minimal shelter while remaining invisible from street level. Tarpaulins salvaged from market discards create waterproof covers that can be quickly dismantled if authorities appear. Some more established residents have constructed sophisticated structures using materials gradually carried upstairs over months: lightweight frames covered with oilcloth, insulated with newspapers, secured with rope rather than nails to enable swift, silent disassembly when necessary. It's architectural stealth technology, Victorian style. The informal governance of these aerial communities operates on principles that would make political theorists weep with appreciation. Everyone understands that discovery means eviction for all, creating powerful incentives for collective rule enforcement. Children are taught from their first arrival to move silently, stay away from edges, and never create open flames. Waste disposal follows strict protocols. Nothing thrown over edges, all refuse carried down during pre-dawn hours for disposal elsewhere. Conflicts are resolved through whispered mediation rather than the shouting matches common in street-level disputes. It's not democracy, it's survival pragmatism with extraordinarily effective compliance rates. The vertical geography creates its own microeconomy with specializations you won't find in any economics textbook. Those with access to multiple buildings via connected rooftops become messengers and traders, moving goods between isolated roof communities while avoiding street-level detection. Certain skills gain premium value: knowledge of weather-resistant construction techniques, ability to repair roofing damage that might betray their presence to landlords below, expertise in creating rainwater collection systems that don't overflow onto lower floors. The roof's specific challenges create specialized roles unrecognized in conventional economic structures. You're not just poor anymore, you're a vertical resource specialist. The climate advantages become immediately apparent as night falls. While the rooms below remain suffocating with trapped heat and stench, the rooftop catches evening breezes that bring marginally fresher air. During winter, this relationship inverts. The roof becomes dangerously exposed while rooms below benefit from rising heat, creating seasonal migration patterns as residents move between vertical zones based on temperature extremes. Some maintain claims on both territories through complex timeshare arrangements with relatives or friends, maximizing survival chances throughout the year. It's sophisticated environmental adaptation without a single scientific instrument. The roof garden represents perhaps the most remarkable adaptation, transforming barren tar into sustenance through sheer stubborn ingenuity. In scattered broken pots, cracked buckets, and even open-seamed boots filled with soil scavenged from parks, residents cultivate herbs, onions, radishes, and occasionally small root vegetables. These microplots provide nowhere near subsistence levels of food, but offer crucial nutritional supplements and occasional medicinal herbs unavailable to the strictly ground-dwelling poor. The rooftop gardeners develop specialized knowledge about which plants can survive the harsh conditions of constant wind, irregular watering, and limited soil depth. Rooftop agriculture in Victorian London, vertical farming before it was trendy. Privacy. That most elusive luxury for the Victorian poor finds unexpected space on the rooftops. Couples create designated areas behind ventilation structures for rare moments of intimacy, impossible in crowded rooms below. Young women establish washing stations behind chimney stacks, allowing for personal hygiene with dignity denied in shared ground-level facilities. The psychological value of these private moments in lives otherwise defined by constant observation and crowding cannot be overstated. Rooftop residents often describe feeling human again in these aerial sanctuaries. Privacy isn't just comfort, it's the restoration of personhood. The soundtrack of roof life differs dramatically from the constant cacophony below. Street vendors' calls, carriage wheels, industrial machinery, and human arguments create the inescapable background noise of ground-level existence. The rooftops exist above this layer of sound, wrapped instead in the muted rumble of chimneys, the whisper of wind across slate tiles, and the calls of urban birds that most Londoners never notice. This auditory relief provides genuine recovery for nervous systems frayed by constant noise exposure, a health benefit completely unrecognized by Victorian medical science, but instinctively understood by those who've experienced both worlds. Navigation between rooftops becomes a specialized knowledge set passed down with the solemnity of sacred wisdom, which buildings can be traversed safely, where gaps can be bridged with planks during dry weather, which routes provide emergency escape when authorities appear. This mental mapping creates alternative geographies known only to vertical dwellers. Certain pathways become informal highways of rooftop travel, allowing movement across entire blocks without descending to street level. For those avoiding creditors, abusive spouses, or police attention, these aerial routes provide literal salvation. It's an entirely parallel transportation system unknown to the world below. The politics of roof access operates through elaborate social networks that would impress the most exclusive London clubs. Not everyone is permitted knowledge of access points or welcomed into established communities. Gatekeepers evaluate potential newcomers based on recommendations from trusted connections, assessment of risk factors, alcohol dependency, untreated mental illness, criminal associations, and the critical determination of whether they can maintain the strict silence necessary for collective survival. Betraying a roof community by enabling discovery is the unforgivable sin in this parallel society. Exclusivity isn't snobbery, it's collective security enforcement. Legal status exists in fascinating grey areas that would give property lawyers migraines. Technically, roof dwellers are trespassing, but on spaces no one has claimed for habitation. They're not breaking into buildings, merely utilizing neglected exterior surfaces. Police rarely venture above second-floor level during inspections, and building owners, if they suspect rooftop occupation, often tacitly permit it as long as no damage occurs or services are stolen. This quiet tolerance creates a rare zone of semi-permission in an otherwise highly regulated urban environment. It's not legal, but it's not exactly illegal either. It's super-legal, existing above the law both figuratively and literally. The knowledge transfer between roof communities happens through specialized messengers, often chimney sweeps, repair workers, or others with legitimate roof access who sympathize with the hidden residents. These information conduits carry warnings about planned inspections, news about newly accessible buildings, or alerts about structural dangers discovered in similar architecture elsewhere. This intelligence network operates entirely separately from ground-level information channels, creating a parallel communication system literally above conventional society. It's Victorian data transfer with near-perfect security protocols. Weather takes on life or death significance in rooftop existence. A sudden storm that ground dwellers might experience as a mere inconvenience becomes an existential threat when your shelter consists of salvaged tarpaulins on an exposed rooftop. Roof communities develop elaborate warning systems and emergency protocols, designated storm shelters in more substantial structures, rapid disassembly procedures for vulnerable housing, collective child protection responsibilities during dangerous conditions. Victorian meteorological knowledge becomes highly developed among these aerial survivors out of absolute necessity. They can't predict the weather, but they can read its approaching threats with an accuracy that would impress modern meteorologists. The view that unexpected luxury provides psychological sustenance amid material deprivation, while the wealthy pay premiums for upper-floor apartments with scenic vistas, the rooftop or access breathtaking panoramas of London impossible from street level. The psychological impact of this perspective shift appears repeatedly in the scattered accounts of roof dwellers who've left records, the ability to see beyond immediate surroundings, to witness sunrises and sunsets, to observe weather patterns approaching from miles away. This expanded horizon provides rare moments of transcendence in lives otherwise constrained by the immediate struggle for survival. In a city designed to make the poor feel small, the rooftops offer literal perspective. The economics of roof dwelling creates surprising advantages despite its obvious hardships. Without rent payments, residents can direct meager earnings toward food, clothing, or saving toward legitimate housing. Some use these aerial bases as temporary economic recovery spaces, living rent-free for months while accumulating enough savings to re-enter the conventional housing market with first month's rent and deposits. Others establish semi-permanent communities, accepting the physical challenges in exchange for economic breathing room impossible in legitimate housing with its constant rent pressure. Roof dwelling isn't just desperation, it's sometimes coldly rational economic strategy. Class invisibility becomes both protection and prison. Roof dwellers exist literally above the notice of authorities, charity workers and social reformers escaping both harassment and potential assistance. This absence from official awareness means no access to poor relief, charity distributions or medical services. You're safer from immediate intervention but excluded from systemic support. The calculation becomes brutally practical. Is the freedom from constant scrutiny worth the separation from resources, however inadequate, available to the acknowledged poor? The sociology of roof communities reveals remarkable cooperation rarely seen in ground-level slums. The extreme vulnerability of their position creates powerful incentives for collective action and resource sharing. Water, that most precious urban resource, is collected in shared receptacles during rainfall and distributed according to need rather than contribution. Improvised stoves are communal property, with cooking rotations established to minimize fire risks and fuel consumption. Children become collective responsibilities, watched by whoever remains on the roof while others work below. This cooperative ethic isn't born from idealism, but from the pragmatic recognition that survival in these conditions is impossible without mutual aid. Nighttime transforms these vertical villages into magical otherworlds. Small candles appear, carefully shielded to prevent detection from below, creating constellations of human warmth among the chimney forests. Whispered conversations create a gentle murmur as residents process the day's events and plan tomorrow's necessities. Sometimes, on special occasions, someone produces a harmonica or penny whistle, playing softly enough that the sound dissipates before reaching street level. In these moments, the rooftop poor create community celebrations completely invisible to the city below, finding joy in spaces never intended for human habitation. As dawn approaches, the rooftop choreography begins again, dismantling obvious signs of habitation, storing belongings in hidden crannies behind chimneys, dispatching those with regular employment down to the world below. The physical evidence of this aerial society disappears with the night, leaving London's roofscape apparently uninhabited when viewed during daylight hours. The population becomes ghost-like, existing in the urban imagination as occasionally glimpsed shadows rather than acknowledged citizens. This vertical expansion of survival space represents perhaps the most innovative adaptation to Victorian urban pressures. When horizontal territory becomes unaffordable, uninhabitable, or criminalized, the poor simply rise above these constraints, creating habitable environments in the negative space officially designated for smoke ventilation and rainwater management. They transform architectural afterthoughts into survival zones, demonstrating resilience that would be admirable if witnessed by a society capable of recognizing innovation among those it has discarded. As you settle into your borrowed corner of the rooftop, spreading your coat as bedding on the tarred surface, you experience your first night of sleep in days. The air, while not clean by any objective standard, lacks the concentrated toxicity of your room below. The relative silence soothes nerves, frayed by constant noise exposure. The rare privacy allows physical and psychological unwinding impossible in shared spaces, even with its obvious dangers and discomforts. This unauthorized territory provides what legitimate housing cannot: affordable existence with minimal dignity. The Victorian city, with its rigid classifications and boundaries, never accounted for human innovation in its vertical dimension. While theorists map poverty across neighborhoods and reformers target specific streets for intervention, entire communities exist above their sightlines, creating parallel geographies of survival, invisible to official understanding. The roofs represent the ultimate adaptation. When a system provides no legitimate space for existence, people will create illegitimate spaces rather than simply cease to exist. But even the most innovative physical adaptations cannot fully protect against the psychological toll of Victorian poverty. When your body has secured temporary sanctuary, your mind still faces the relentless struggle to maintain equilibrium in a world designed to break it. 12. Laugh, pray, and carry on. Your stomach is empty. Your lungs are filling with cotton dust. The landlord has threatened eviction. Your youngest has a cough that sounds increasingly like the consumption that took your mother. By any rational assessment, your situation is objectively desperate. Yet somehow, you're telling a joke to your neighbor as you queue for water at the public pump. Welcome to the final and perhaps most remarkable survival strategy of the Victorian poor: psychological resilience in the face of material catastrophe. The mental fortitude required to endure Victorian poverty without collapsing under its weight represents an unacknowledged masterclass in psychological survival. This isn't the stiff upper lip stoicism celebrated in middle-class Victorian literature. It's a sophisticated set of cognitive strategies developed through generations of navigating systematic deprivation. While the physical adaptations are visible to outside observers, however misinterpreted, these psychological mechanisms remain largely invisible in historical records, glimpsed only occasionally in working-class memoirs, court testimonies, and the dark humor preserved in folk songs and street performances. Humor becomes perhaps the most powerful and pervasive psychological tool, not the gentle whimsy of drawing room comedy, but the biting, dark sarcasm that transforms unbearable circumstances into momentarily manageable absurdities. In the laundry yards where women's hands bleed from lye exposure, gallows humor flows as freely as the toxic runoff. At least we'll have the cleanest corpses in the cemetery. They call to each other over the steaming vats. It's not funny in any conventional sense. It's funny because the alternative to laughter is screaming. The music halls, those cathedral theaters of working-class entertainment, institutionalize this psychological survival mechanism. For pennies, the poor access performances that transform their daily struggles into darkly comic spectacle. Songs about starvation, eviction, alcoholism, and domestic violence set to jauntily upbeat melodies create cognitive dissonance that somehow makes these realities fractionally more bearable when encountered outside the theater. The performers, often from poverty themselves, develop precise calibration of how dark is too dark, the line between cathartic recognition and unbearable reflection. Religious practice transforms from middle-class moral obligation to psychological survival tool. The chapel or church becomes not just spiritual center, but therapeutic space. Perhaps the only environment where the poor can sit quietly, experience beauty through music and architecture, and momentarily escape immediate physical pressures. The theology often matters less than the practice. The ritualized breathing of familiar prayers creating inadvertent mindfulness exercises, the communal singing producing documented neurochemical benefits, the weekly gathering providing social connection otherwise scarce in transient communities. Prayer itself evolves unique characteristics among the Victorian poor. Rather than the formal, stilted supplications of official religion, their prayers become pragmatic negotiations with a God understood to be as capricious and potentially hostile as other authorities. Just get us through winter replaces theological complexity. Let the baby's fever break, and I'll never touch gin again, offers desperate transaction rather than submission. These prayers, raw, direct, conditional, represent psychological pragmatism rather than spiritual purity. For communities systematically excluded from mainstream religion, particularly Irish Catholics in Protestant London, underground religious practices create parallel psychological support systems, house masses in tenement rooms, saints' medals hidden under clothing during workhouse stays, whispered rosaries during factory shifts. These prohibited spiritual technologies provide psychological scaffolding when official support systems are inaccessible or actively hostile. Storytelling emerges as crucial psychological nourishment. Families with oral traditions transplanted from rural environments maintain connection to alternative realities through tales told in crowded rooms after work. These narratives implicitly challenge Victorian society's insistence that current conditions are inevitable or deserved. Folk heroes outsmart landlords, magical intervention balances unjust power, and alternative value systems temporarily displace the crushing weight of industrial capitalism's moral framework. Memory curation becomes sophisticated, psychological self-protection. The selective preservation of better times, a Sunday excursion to Hampstead Heath, a Christmas when meat was affordable, a summer when no one in the family fell ill, creates crucial reference points that make current suffering appear temporary rather than eternal. These memories are revisited collectively through family storytelling, polished through repetition until they gain almost talismanic power against present difficulties. Future projection serves similar psychological function. Plans are made despite statistical improbability of their fulfillment, saving pennies toward apprenticeship fees for children, discussing emigration possibilities, mapping pathways to marginally better employment. These projections acknowledge the reality of constraints while psychologically resisting their permanence. Even when material conditions make fulfillment unlikely, the act of planning itself creates psychological breathing room essential for daily functioning. Compartmentalization becomes necessary survival skill. The Victorian poor develop remarkable abilities to separate immediate experience from total identity. Factory workers describe sending their minds elsewhere during grueling shifts, maintaining rich internal lives beneath compliant external performance. Domestic servants cultivate dual consciousness, performing perfect deference while maintaining hidden selfhood impervious to employers' degradations. This psychological partitioning enables endurance of conditions that would otherwise create unbearable cognitive dissonance. Pride in specific skills or knowledge provides crucial psychological anchoring amid systematic devaluation. The seamstress takes fierce satisfaction in stitches invisible to inspection. The docker's specialized knot tying becomes source of identity transcending disposable labor status. The scavenger's encyclopedic knowledge of London's waste patterns offers self-respect regardless of social estimation. These private valuations of personal capacity provide psychological counterweight to a system determined to reduce humans to interchangeable production units. Family mythology develops as psychological inheritance alongside material poverty. Many families maintain stories of former prosperity, however modest: a grandfather who owned his own cart, an ancestor who could read Latin, a grandmother who once served in a great house. Whether strictly accurate or embellished through generations, these narratives create psychological continuity and suggest that current conditions represent temporary deviation rather than permanent state. The phrase, "We weren't always this poor" appears with remarkable frequency in working-class autobiographies, regardless of documented economic history. Ritual resistance provides essential psychological outlets when material resistance proves impossible. The calculated slowdown, when a foreman becomes particularly abusive. The deliberately broken dish, when an employer's demands become excessive. The collective forgetting of instructions that would endanger workers. These small, often invisible acts of defiance rarely change material conditions, but provide crucial psychological assertion of humanity against systems of dehumanization. Privacy, that rarest of commodities, is manufactured through psychological means when physical separation proves impossible. Women in crowded tenements report leaving in my mind during rare moments of repose, developing rich internal landscapes, accessible regardless of external conditions. Children master the art of psychological absence while physically present, creating hidden, imaginative worlds beneath compliant exteriors. Men cultivate selective sensory filtering, mentally dampening the cacophony of shared spaces to create moments of psychological solitude. Community validation counters societal invalidation through sophisticated networks of mutual recognition. In a society structured to communicate the worthlessness of the poor at every turn, horizontal acknowledgement between peers provides crucial psychological counterbalance. The subtle nod between factory workers exceeding quota despite management's impossible demands. The unspoken understanding between mothers navigating similar impossible choices. The recognition of shared humanity that needs no articulation between those occupying common struggle. These validations rarely appear in historical records, but emerge consistently in working-class memoirs as essential psychological sustenance. The capacity for joy despite circumstance perhaps most confounds middle-class observers who mistake momentary happiness for contentment with conditions. The poor develop remarkable abilities to fully inhabit transient pleasures, a street musician's tune prompting spontaneous dancing, a rare sweet shared among children creating genuine delight, a particularly spectacular sunset over industrial rooftops momentarily transcending surroundings. This isn't denial of reality, but sophisticated psychological insistence that reality cannot entirely claim human capacity for joy. Selective focus becomes refined cognitive skill, the ability to temporarily center attention on a window plant's new growth, rather than the peeling walls around it, the capacity to fully notice a child's smile while backgrounding awareness of their protruding ribs, the discipline to experience a moment of birdsong without simultaneously processing the industrial clamor beneath it. These attentional shifts represent not naivety, but sophisticated psychological self-regulation, essential for preventing complete despair. Through these mechanisms and countless others, the Victorian poor maintain psychological integrity in conditions explicitly designed to break them. The remarkable achievement isn't just physical survival against material odds, but the preservation of essential humanity against systematic dehumanization. They live and die in conditions that would horrify modern observers, yet somehow retain capacity for humor, love, creativity, and connection that their circumstances should theoretically render impossible. As night falls on your corner of Victorian London, you gather with neighbors in the shared yard behind your tenement. Someone has salvaged half a bottle of beer from a pub's discards. Another has 3 potatoes to roast in the communal fire made from collected wood scraps. A child has found a dead rat, prompting raucous betting on its weight rather than disgust at its proximity. An old man begins a story everyone has heard before, but will enthusiastically pretend is new. In this moment, surrounded by conditions that should produce nothing but despair, something remarkable happens. Laughter rises genuine and unforced. Connection forms across differences of background and circumstance. Joy, brief, conditional but entirely real, emerges from surroundings designed to crush it. This isn't ignorance of reality but deliberate, collective insistence that reality cannot have everything, that human capacity for meaning-making, connection, and momentary transcendence survives even in the shadow of Victorian London's monstrous inequalities. The true miracle of the Victorian poor isn't that they developed ingenious techniques for navigating toxic water, lethal air, inadequate food, exploitative employment, punitive welfare, and impossible housing. The miracle is that they somehow remained recognizably, insistently human while doing so, preserving their essential dignity, not despite, but through their necessary adaptations to systematically inhumane conditions. Modern viewers watching this journey through Victorian London's physical horrors might reasonably wonder how anyone survived such conditions. The more profound question is how anyone survived them psychologically intact, how human spirits endured in environments explicitly designed to break them. The answer lies in these sophisticated psychological technologies developed through generations of necessity, preserved in community knowledge, and passed down as essential survival inheritance alongside more visible physical strategies. As you return to your cramped room, lungs aching from cotton dust and stomach pinched with hunger, you find yourself humming a tune from childhood. Tomorrow brings more of the same, the endless work, the constant calculations, the impossible choices. But tonight, for this moment, you've carved out psychological space beyond mere survival. Not because Victorian London has given you any reason for hope, but because you and those like you have refused to surrender the capacity for it. This, perhaps, is the most remarkable feat of the Victorian poor, not just that they survived a system designed to consume them, but that they somehow remained capable of joy while doing so. The least Victorian response to Victorian London's horrors wasn't anger or despair, but the stubborn insistence on humanity that no external condition could entirely claim. That capacity for psychological resistance, for laughing, praying, and carrying on despite everything, might be their most profound legacy and the true miracle of their impossible survival.